Welcome back everyone to the continuation of my K24 K20 engine build. Today we're going to be dropping the head down onto the block, installing the timing set, and even some of the exterior components if all goes well. I will also be covering why I'm not showing you guys how to install all the components that go into the head, since I wasn't able to cover it in the last video. So without further ado, let's continue this amazing engine build. First thing we're going to do is we're going to install our ARP harmonic balancer bolt that we got from 4Piston Racing, so that way we can turn this engine over easier, so that way whenever we install all the timing components and the rest of the oil pump parts, makes it a little bit easier on us. Here we're going to go ahead and throw on the oil pump chain tensioner, and I just torque these down to pretty tight. I don't have an exact torque spec, but it's going to be something around 10 to 15 foot-pounds. Once you have that torqued down, you can go ahead and pull out the clip that holds back the spring tension that releases the tensioner, so that way the chain becomes tight. Jesus Christ.
God, I'm funny.
You're the funniest. Brand new Type S oil pan baffle.
Replace turbo on the engine.
Yeah, I cheated a little bit. I had to look something up.
Yeah. Kind of ran out of room, but I said, here's to 1,000 horsepower. I'll be faster one day.
Okay, cool. I dig it. I hope you are. Now's the point where I'm going to be prepping the block to receive the head. So what we're going to be doing from here is I'm cleaning the top of the block, because even though we spent the first video, the first part of that, really making sure everything is nice and clean, now that we've assembled the majority of the short block, we need to make sure that all the surfaces that we're going to be putting gaskets and things on are still clean and oil free and dry. Now's the time for us to install the 625 plus rated head studs that we got from 4Piston Racing. I've said this before and I will say it many times after, I am not certified to tell you how to install anything, let alone be building an engine to this caliber. But if you're here and you're listening to me, this is what I have to say, and I urge you to please do your own research whenever you're learning how to do this type of stuff. There are many differing opinions on how to install head studs. The way that I did it is I lubricated the threads that go into the block, I spun them in as far as I could by hand, and then I took an Allen key and I ran it down fully inside the block and probably put about 10 foot-pounds of torque onto each one of the studs until they were fully bottomed out inside the block. As I said, there are a lot of different opinions about that. Some people say, yeah, bottom them out, torque them down as hard as you want. There are some people that say you should only tighten them by hand, and there are some people that say you should tighten them by hand and then back them off a quarter of a turn. And that is due to thermal expansion and a few other factors. Like I said, the way that I did it is that I bottomed them out and put a little bit of tension on each stud. That's how I did it. That is how this engine is going to run. After you have that taken care of and you make sure that the surface of the block is completely clean, it is now head gasket time. This can only go on one way. And it's this way. Here's the part number for the 2 dowel pins that go on the intake side. Make sure that those are in your block. If not, you should probably get some.
What?
So, I said thank God for that K20 over there, because it's really helping me out with the 24.
What are those?
These are dowels that perfectly align the head to the block itself.
You have 4 of those?
2 only. Okay, here we go. I gotta get it over here, and I have to clean it, but this is it.
You gotta clean it.
The bottom, just alcohol.
Oh, okay.
So there's no oil on it.
Not like you have like all these little things.
Yeah, no. So while I walk over and grab the head and bring it back over here so that way we can clean it for the install, this is the time I'm going to take to explain to you guys why I'm not going to be showing you how to build the head. It's something that I wanted to cover. It's something that I am going to try and cover in the future. I'm sure at some point I will have the opportunity. But to be fair and to be honest, there are plenty of videos on YouTube showing how to do this. The K series is a very, very popular engine platform. It has been for a long time, and it seems to be becoming more and more popular as time goes on. But the answer to the question is going to sound very familiar, and I apologize for that. but it is the truth. Whenever I took the head to the machine shop to get all the machining work done to it, they had to assemble the head. It is something that had to be done to make sure that all of the tolerances were measured correctly. It's how that we got all of the new parts in, and it's the process of the 3-angle valve job had to be done. And once it was all done and taken care of, the only value added to it would be for me to have taken it apart just to show you guys how to put it back together completely again. And it's just not a step that I thought would be valuable enough to give you guys. Now, I would like to think that the K series head is one of the easier heads to work on, to be frank. And there are little tools. I'll put up a picture here of the tool that I have. This is a very cheap, inexpensive tool that you can get, and it's not the fastest thing in the world, but this is pretty much the only tool that you need to fully disassemble your K series head and to put it back together with fresh parts or whatever you may be doing to it. The only other tool that I don't have that might be of some use is a valve stem seal driver, but a lot of people just end up using like a 10mm socket, like with an extension, and just, you know, pounding it in. So it's very common practice, and there have been a lot of success of people doing it like that. And so there's no real special items that you need besides, you know, this one tool to do any I guess what you would call normal head work. Because if there's any machining work that needs to be done, that's obviously something that not the average Joe can do, like me or you, unless you are far more equipped than I am, which if you are, then, you know, I'm jealous. Congratulations. But again, like I said, that's the reason. It's not any more complicated than that. It can be done. If I can do it, I have full faith that you can do it too. So if it's something that you need to do for money saving or time saving, or you're not going this extreme with your head like I have, then more power to you, man, or ladies. I feel like the more that you tackle on your own, the more pride you can have in your build. That's not to say that I'm not super proud of this build and what I've been able to accomplish with it so far, but it's one of those things where I'll never be able to say, yeah, you know, this engine was fully built by me. None of this would have been possible without the help of the machine shop and all the work that they did. So it had to be done. It had to be done in the pursuit of the goals that I have set out for myself. So I hope that helps you. I hope you understand. And I hope that you continue to get some value out of these videos. So I appreciate you. Moving on. Oh my God.
Hello, YouTube camera. I am fatally injured.
Fatally? I wouldn't go that far. All right, ready?
All right. Going this way.
Oh yeah.
You're down on this one. This one.
Okay.
That's it.
I gotta pull the cams out, but
there you go.
It's on. Just gotta remember not to flip the engine over. So now that we've got the head seated down onto the block, we need to pull the cams, and to do that we need to pull off the can caps. You have to pull off the cams in order to get access to the head bolts, or in our case, studs, so that way we can torque down the nuts correctly. Each cam cap is labeled 1 through 5, and it's got an arrow pointing to the front of the block, so it's very difficult to get them mixed up or turned around, so just keep your eyes on that and be mindful of it. This is also a fantastic opportunity to check your lost motion springs, make sure you get everything nice and lubricated, and after we get the head torqued down correctly, we're going to be checking on those things and making sure everything is lubed up correctly. What, baby? No, you didn't. What? What a silly willy girl. Yes, babe. What? Hi, baby.
My Nike.
You naked?
I want to put my shirt on.
You want to put that shirt on?
No, she has to have a bathroom.
Hey, you got to have a bath first, baby. So after you finish bath time, we're going to be lubing up the washers and the nuts and probably the threads of the studs as well. At this point, it's one of those things where what I was told was that, you know, you can't have too much lube, but at the same time, you know, don't go overboard because, you know, the packets that ARP gives you with their assembly lube, you know, you've only got a limited amount unless you know, are a little bit more forward thinking and buy the big pack of it. But from here, you just want to make sure that pretty much every surface that's going to be having torque applied to it is totally lubricated, so that way you get a nice even torque across the entire deck of the head. So what I did was I applied lube to both the upper side and underside of the washers. I applied lube to the top threads of the stud just as we did to the bottom threads of the stud, and I made sure that I got a little bit on the inside of the nut, so that way every single surface there would not be any undue friction to any of the threads or anything. So just as even as possible is the key. That's the goal here. So once you have everything started by hand and everything's looking good, the torque spec that I went with on these is 100 foot-pounds. That may seem a little excessive to some of you. I think the factory torque spec, well, the factory torque spec is based on angle, but if you were to go with just a normal stud, I think, you know, the highest a lot of people go are between 80 and 90, somewhere in there. But the fact that we're going to be boosting this engine, and that is our long-term goal, 100 foot-pounds will help keep the clamping force a little bit more in the range of where we want it. So if we throw a lot of heavy boost at this in the future, we won't have any issues with head gasket or the head lifting or anything like that. So always with torquing something down, especially with something like this, the same thing as we did with the crank girdle, we're going to go in a specific pattern, but we're also going to be torquing it down in a sequence. So you're not going to go straight to 100. You're going to go, you know, something like, you know, 30, 60, 90, 100, something, some type of sequence like that. So you're going to torque all the bolts down to 30 foot-pounds, and then you're going to torque them all down to 60, and then 90, and then 100. I believe that's what I did here. And then the specific torque sequence, I'm going to have that on screen. This is one of the more nerve-wracking parts for me because, for one, it's difficult enough to torque something to 100 foot-pounds on your own, but every single time that thing would click, I would think something's getting stripped out or something like that. So this is probably one of the more difficult parts of this entire build, but once we get it all done, it sure is a big sigh of relief. One step that I did do that I'm not sure if other people do it, but it's just something that I kept in the back of my head, is that once I got everything torqued down to 100 foot-pounds, I actually went back with a breaker bar and I loosened all of the head studs again, and then I went back and torqued everything back down in the same sequence again. I don't know if that was necessary. It probably wasn't, but it was one of those things where it gave me peace of mind. So if that's a step that you guys want to take, I haven't had any issues since I did that, so it might be something that you want to do as well. I did the same thing with the girdle. I did the same thing with the rods. I've done that process with every single thing that had a torque sequence. So torque it down to its final torque spec, loosen it, torque it again. Again, may not be necessary, but it helped me sleep at night. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Whew. head's on. Now that I got the head on, at the time, I thought to myself, wow, it sure would suck if something went down into the combustion chamber at this point. So in my mind, the next smartest thing to do would be to put the spark plugs in. Just a forewarning, I found out later that, at this point in time, I'm really focused on getting the engine put together and all that stuff, but hindsight, of course, is 2020. It's very difficult to turn the engine over when it's at this point making compression. So if you still need to turn the engine over, a better solution may be to just kind of stuff the spark plug tubes with like some shop towels or something like that. I just fought with it and dealt with it because we're getting really close on coming up to putting the engine in time, and putting it in time requires turning it over. So I do believe I pulled them back out at some point or another. I can't recall at this point, but it's just the next step in my mind that made sense, and it turned out to not help me. It didn't work out in my favor to a certain extent, but nothing fell into the combustion chamber, so I guess my plan did work. I got a brand new VTC oil strainer from 4Piston we're going to chuck on. And now that we've got the head torqued down in the right sequence into spec and we're happy with it, we're going to start assembling all of the upper parts of the head and get the cams put back in and get them torqued down to spec. I feel like at this juncture I definitely went overkill on the engine assembly lube, but also at this point I didn't care, because unlike with the ARP stuff that I have an overabundance of this Cleveite bearing guard, and I am not afraid to use it. So we are going to lubricate each and every surface that's going to make any type of contact, and again, not sorry for it. Here we're lubing up the exhaust cam and we're about to drop it in. And here comes the intake cam, same thing. Both cams, you'll find that they'll just kind of have a natural place that they'll want to lie. You just got to rotate them a little bit and then they'll kind of fall into more of a straight position. If you kind of try and fight with it a little bit, it'll kind of come back on you and it won't sit totally flat. Just keep rotating it until you find that nice flat position, because you're going to be rotating them over to get them lined up with your dowel keys anyway to get the engine in time. So don't worry too much about what position they're going to be in, because they're not going to be, putting any stress on anything currently. So just focus on getting them laid down totally straight, so that way we can get the cam caps torqued down. Almost. Here I'm just repositioning all the bolts and the bolts with the top studs on them from where we got the head back from the machine shop. They didn't really, once they pulled everything apart, they didn't really care where all the other stuff went. They just wanted to keep the cams on the head, so they just tightened down each cam cap and got everything, packaged up real nice, but everything just kind of got jumbled up in the process. So I am fixating everything where it needs to be, because some of these bolts have the studs on top where the valve cover bolts down. There is a specific torque sequence, as with everything with this engine, for the cam caps, and I will put that on screen for you guys when the time comes for us to actually torque it. But here I'm just using my little 3/8 electric ratchet to kind of run all the bolts down. The key here is that I'm not torquing them down really tight with the electric ratchet. I'm taking up the slack in the threads on each one of the bolts, but the key here is that you do not want to tighten each bolt down totally on one cam cap. You kind of want to jump around to each different cam cap, so that way you're seating the cams down evenly across the board, because they can technically be warped, so just keep that in mind. But if you just kind of bounce around a little bit from one cam cap to another, you're not going to hurt anything, I promise. Real quick suggestion here for you, just because it's not something that I really show on camera, it's not something that technically can be showed, but the K20, K24 is an interference engine, which, you know, shortly means that the pistons can come into contact with the valves. Once you start torquing down the cam caps, the cams are going to start pushing against your valves. All the valves should be relatively closed, but just for safety, what I did here is I lined up the timing marks on the crank to where all the pistons are down, kind of at the halfway point, so that way there's no chance that there could even just be a little bit of touching, because I just didn't want there to be an issue with that. So we are going to be rotating everything into a timing setup here pretty soon, but I'm going to rotate the cams first and get them all timed up, and then I'm going to put the crankshaft at top dead center, so just keep that in mind. It is finally time to torque down all the cam caps to get the cams completely seated down onto the head, and I do believe that this is kind of the last part where it's really nerve-wracking for me. Any time that I have to torque something down to a specific spec, it always kind of, you know, makes my nerves get a little bit shot. But I believe that this is kind of the final biggest hurdle that we have to jump as far as building this block is concerned, and that made me super excited. So on screen here is the torque sequence that you have to torque everything down to, including the foot-pounds. So what we have here is we've got on the larger bolts we've got 16 foot-pounds, and on the smaller ones we have the 8.7 foot-pounds. So on those, my torque wrench won't actually go down to 8.7. The lowest it can do is 10. So I just kind of got everything torqued down, and I just did those by hand. I didn't go super hard on those. We have finally made it to the timing components of this engine build. So we're going to be rotating the cams until the internal holes are aligned on the pulse plate, and we can put in our little cam locking tool from Honda. Thing came in really big handy to make this job super simple.
Oh boy, she builds compression, she builds it good.
So here I bust out my fancy drag cartel heavy duty K24 timing chain. So this has always been super simple on these engines. So they have these golden links where you just line up the links to the arrows that are pointing on the cam phasers, and you just pull it down and you line up the single gold link at the bottom with the crankshaft dot, and you just keep all the slack on the left side, and that's when you can slap on your timing chain guide and your tensioner, and that's pretty much it. I mean, these engines are ridiculously simple to put in time, and I really appreciate that, because this is also one of those things that kind of gets my nerves going, but thankfully Honda made this extremely easy. So I'll put an image on screen here to just kind of give you an overall idea of how to get the crankshaft and everything onto top dead center, but it is extremely easy. Like I said, just line the arrows up at the base there, and thanks to the Honda cam alignment tool, you don't really have to worry about the top part either. So once you have all this in line and everything, on screen is also, you'll see some torque specs for each of the bolts. I didn't really follow a torque spec per se for any of this stuff that I tightened, especially the chain guide bolts. I just kind of torqued them down to a spec that I felt was necessary. But for your own peace of mind, I do have some on the screen. Here I'm just putting a little sideways pressure on the tensioner itself, so that way it takes up a little bit of the slack. That's the clicking that you're hearing. So all that's doing is making sure the chain is tensioned out of the gate, so that way it's not relying purely on oil pressure to come through and create that tension. So it's already ratcheted out to the point to where it's got a decent amount of tension on the chain, so that way we don't experience any slippage. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we turn the cams just a little bit to loosen up the Honda cam alignment tool, so that way we can get that pulled out. Next, we're going to install the modified pulse plate for the crank position sensor. Here I'm just trying to show you guys how the alignment dowel goes into the crankshaft. Just make sure that that curved surface is going in first and facing down. Now that all the timing components are taken care of, we're going to go ahead and knock out the valve adjustment. So valve adjustment on a solid valve train like on the K series is very, very important. This will make sure that there is no interference issues with the valves to the pistons, and it also makes sure that the valves are opening and closing exactly when they're supposed to, and there's not any undue stress on the valve train itself. I just went with the factory valve adjustment, so I did 10 thousandths on the exhaust side and 8 thousandths on the intake side. What time do we have to be there? 3? Okay. What time is it?
How's it coming?
It's in time.
Like minutes, seconds, hours?
The
I'm
crank.
kidding. I'm kidding.
The crankshaft rotates at the same rate as the camshafts do now, which what makes an engine.
Yes, baby.
So, with that being said, everything from here on out, assuming I did everything right, I've done before. At this point, it's really easy to feel like we're on the home stretch and forget some crucial things and, you know, maybe mess up here and there. So it's very important to just kind of keep your head and just make sure you don't overlook anything, because something extremely simple can cause you to be pulling the engine back out or having to do something, you know, that you could have avoided if you just would have been paying a little bit more attention. So we're going to keep being extremely thorough and, well, as thorough as we can be. And so from here on out, it does feel like we're on the home stretch. But here we're going to be making sure that we get the Honda bond, put on the timing cover and all the seals and everything that is necessary to keep the oil in places it needs to be and out of places it doesn't need to be. In case you're unfamiliar with Honda bond and how it works, it's just like, you know, pretty much any RTV that you've ever dealt with, but I'm going to read you the directions real quick. So it says, on the back of the bottle, it says, directions: wipe off any moisture, oil, or dirt from the surface. Apply as thinly and evenly as possible using a brush or a putty knife. Wait approximately 1 minute and then join the two surfaces. After use, expel air out of the tube and close cap tightly. Air confined in the tube may cause hardening of the product. Under that it says curing speed. Since reaction with atmospheric moisture causes curing, the curing speed depends upon the film thickness and relative humidity at 77 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% relative humidity. The surface layer will dry in about 60 minutes, and the film sets into a rubber-like consistency in 15 to 16 hours. It takes about 3 days for perfect sealing, since curing develops from the surface. The thicker the layer, the more time it takes to cure inside. Do not apply onto copper and copper alloys in confined areas. So the process of letting the Honda bond cure is extremely important. You can't just slap it on there and then go straight to a torque spec on the surfaces that you're working on. So you see me putting the timing cover on here, but I'm only tightening the bolts down virtually hand tight, so that way the Honda bond has time to rubberize, so to speak.
pretty much. Still haven't found what I'm looking for, and I still haven't found what I'm looking for.
Oil pan done. And so with the oil pan being done, it has been a long road up until this point, but all of the major components of this engine build are now totally complete. There are still a couple more parts to this series that I'm going to be posting for you guys very soon, I promise you that. But I want to thank you very much for coming along this journey with me. It was very, very nerve-wracking. It was a long time coming, and this plan for this build has been in my head for literally years now, and I'm very excited to hopefully get this thing in the car soon, get it running. Hopefully everything goes as according to plan, but you guys are going to come with me every step of the way. So like I said, look forward to part 3, possibly part 4 in this series, but in the next episode we're going to be taking care of a lot of the little minor details of this build, getting simple stuff put on, bolted on, and getting the engine even closer to getting ready to be dropped into the engine bay. But first, we've got to get the K20Z1 out of the RSX.
This is the biggest project on your channel.
Yep,
How's it feel it's finally getting this close?
feels pretty good.
Still very nervous that something's going to go horribly wrong. Just don't know what that is yet. Maybe nothing bad will go wrong. That's the hope, right?
Like I said, I'll figure out a way to get in the RSX and work the laptop for you.
Yeah, you gotta run the laptop, dude.
I'll be there.
You gotta be my Paul Walker. He'd be so proud.
Lizzie hit 100 before he died, like Betty. I'm like Betty White.
Damn. That's savage. You really said that.
Oh, no, I don't have my phone. No.
What do you need your phone for?
Hold on. I was gonna make a joke. I don't have the picture. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. Ah.
All right, timing gear set.
Hey Brandon, let that sink in. Jesus Christ.
If I walk to the sea, baby, I never say for I will fall into the light. Every time I try to breathe,